Welcome to Trader Talk TV. Today I've got Tom Kershaw with me from Rubicon. Tom, thanks for doing this today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Tom's the CTO of Rubicon and he's here today to talk about identity. It's a huge issue in our industry, but before we do that, Tom, just give us an overview of what you do at Rubicon and talk about your role a little bit.
So I run the technology organization, so the product management, operations, and engineering teams that work in the factory to build all the cool stuff that we're building.
Excellent. And obviously identity is a huge issue at the minute, given that GDPR is about to arrive in the next couple of months, and also given the continued control of Facebook and Google over the spend in this industry. So, Tom, you're here today to talk about how we can build a identity layer that will help all constituent players in the ecosystem. But before we do that, let's talk about where we're at the minute. What's the state of play, and talk about sort of why Facebook, Google have such a stranglehold over this industry.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't recognize how messy the current system is for advertising. And you know, if you kind of step back and figure out how do we determine what ads to show to what user, the answer is less clean than a lot of people would understand, especially consumers. So if you look at your average consumer, and they're on their laptop or whatever, and they're in a web browser, and they'll go to any number of websites, and maybe it'll be a social networking site and a messaging site and a bunch of other ones, right? And so all of these websites, whenever someone types in a URL in their browser, they're going to go to this website. And the owner of this website is going to drop a little piece of script, a little piece of code, and that code physically lives on their computer. And it just says, here's who that user is. That publisher is then going to go talk to an exchange or to an ad network or someone who's going to provide monetization. That could be Rubicon, that could be someone else. This exchange is then going to drop a little bit of code on the browser and say, I need to know who that user is. Then we're going to talk to hundreds of buyers, brands, DSPs, agencies out there who want to reach that user. And they're going to say, you know what? I need my identifier on the page. So they're going to tell us, well, you need to drop that identifier too. So there's 150 little scripts from all the little buyers, times all of the exchanges. So before you know it, your browser, your physical machine that's yours, that you bought, has got lines and lines and lines of code that identify who you are and track your every movement around the web. That's how we've done this for years. And it's amazing that only now we're saying, this isn't a good idea.
It's broken.
It's broken. It slows down the user experience. It is very, very bad from a privacy and security perspective. So what we want to do is move away from this model where we're tracking users and more towards a model where we're modeling users. And this is even worse for mobile apps. Because for a mobile app, if you're an app developer on a phone, and you're building this app and you want it to be super fast and super smooth, in order to monetize, everybody's going to come along with this thing called an SDK, right? An SDK is a little bit of code that just makes it easier for you. And then you have an SDK for monetization, you have an SDK for viewability, you have an SDK for tracking, you have an SDK for the SDK to manage the SDKs. And before you know it, you've got more code from third parties than you do in your own app.
So there's that, and obviously that slows the process. That slows the usability of the app as well. Load time.
It slows it down. It makes it crash.
And break.
It crashes. We literally have seen cases where these gigantic SDKs are crashing apps. This is bad for users, and so the whole industry has really finally started to understand we need to move to server-side solutions.
And obviously, as well, the other thing as well, because so much syncing going on, the deprecation of actually what the user is and what they think it is going to break down. So it can be such a bad system in terms of like identifying that user.
Well, and when your entire identity model is based on code on a device, you don't understand that user is holistically, because very few users just use one device. No one sits at their computer for 24 hours a day, in a cave, going like this. They move from a computer to a mobile phone to an over-top device to an Android Auto. They're listening to music in their car. They have many, many different ways they're going to interact with the digital economy. So we need to have a holistic view, because you don't want to see the same ad 30 times throughout the day. You want to see as few ads as possible and have those be effective, have those be relevant, and have those be important to you.
And this is obviously versus the duopoly who have logged in deterministic data, which gives them a unique advantage in terms of like the type of data they can actually ingest and obviously serve ads to.
Yeah, I think that there's certain types of apps that get the lion's share of eyeballs. Social networking today and messaging are big drawers of eyeballs. It used to be that search was the way you navigated this world, and search is heavily based on the concept of view into the client. But as that moves towards apps and that moves towards data modeling, the importance of all the creative community that are building apps and building sites and doing amazing things, we have to allow those to monetize effectively and not just give all the money to a handful of providers. That's the way we stop innovation. So the enabling of innovation and progress and all the cool things really means allowing this group of app developers and publishers to compete on a level playing field with the rest of the ecosystem.
Okay, so how do we fix this, and where do we need to go, and what are the steps to actually get to that point?
So one of the biggest trends in the industry right now is stop putting code on devices and on browsers and phones. So move that functionality into the network, much like we saw happen with compute in the cloud era. It used to be you had to have everything, you had to control everything. Cloud has said, let's let the experts really understand the infrastructure. This is the same thing. We're going to move all of this script off of the page. We're going to get rid of this, and we're going to move it all into a server-side environment. And in that server-side environment, that's when all the identification and mapping will take place. And then we'll be able to call out to buyers and demand sources from that server side. So what that means is we have to pull the script off the page and still maintain the integrity of the identity of the users. What that means is we all have to trust whatever solution we come up with to identify who a user is.
So what do you think that system would look like? Will it be vendor-led? Because obviously there's a bunch of initiatives on the market right now, or they're trying to push it. So there's the co-op idea where we are working with a non-profit, or there's an idea that all the vendors come together and have one identifier. So what do you think what way should we go and what way will win effectively?
Well, whatever it is, it has to be a cooperative. It has to be owned by the industry, it has to be open, and it has to be fully transparent. Because we can't have black box solutions that we don't trust. So there's different approaches to this, though, whether it's buy-side or sell-side driven. So there's one school of thought that says, let's take all these independent pubs, thousands of them, and app developers, and have them standardize on a single common identifier. Have them drop that identifier on the page or onto the device, and then that standardized identifier will replace all these proprietary ones. And this is called DigiTrust. This is a group of publishers that will come together to create that common identifier. So it's one approach that all the publishers follow, and then as the exchange, you're receiving a single identifier from every page, which you can then use to map out to buyers. The good news about this is it's a super solid, standardized way of doing things that empowers the publisher community. The negative to it is it requires all publishers to kind of do the same thing at the same time, so it's going to take a while to be adopted. The second approach is led by the buyers. And if you look at the code on the page today, the vast majority of this, 90% of it, comes from buyers dropping pixels. So what the buyers are saying is, we can get together and we can form our own group of kind of buy-side players. We'll standardize on a single identifier that we'll all use, and we'll ask the exchanges to all drop that identifier for us. So these are different approaches to the same problem, but buyers and sellers need to kind of come together to create a single view as to what a user is.
And how do you think we get there? Because obviously there's been a bunch of co-ops set up in Europe and different markets that have tried to do this, and it hasn't worked very well because of infighting, as you say, like competitive reasons, etc. So how do we bring that industry together, or how do we bring them to this point?
Yeah, I think we have to move beyond co-op and leverage open source. So this becomes much like Linux did, and many of these other initiatives Prebid is doing for server-side header bidding, to allow collective ownership of assets. And we have to move away from this view that everything's intellectual property and everything's a differentiator. So this is much like anti-fraud, like some of the issues some of the initiatives in the industry that have gotten rid of fraud by joining together. We have to join together to solve this problem. Otherwise, we're going to continue to slow down the page, slow down apps, and prevent ourselves from effectively competing with those that have logged in users. So this is not just a marriage of convenience. This is an imperative that we select standardized ways of identifying users, and we move towards a model that doesn't require us to track users around the web.
Okay. So at the minute, where are we at in terms of achieving that? Are we close to that, or Is there a chance that this, because obviously we're at an inflection point, given the fact that GDPR is coming up as well, which is going to have a massive impact over how we use third-party data or how we use first-party data. It's going to be a huge impact in Europe, obviously, because it's a European-only initiative. But obviously, the UK are going to follow the GDPR stance. So how does that impact how quickly this gets done? Because the conversations we have are all about, at the minute, all about GDPR, all about how it's going to impact ad tech, how it's going to impact digital advertising, how it's going to impact performance advertising. So it is a huge impact. So do you think that's going to move things along fairly quickly here as well?
Yeah, I think that GDPR is, while the initiative is specific to Europe, this is about redefining identity,
right,
and redefining tracking and giving users control, right? And so what GDPR really does is it makes this cooperative model between publishers, exchanges, third parties, and buyers imperative. Because the way it's going to work is a user is going to say, I want to opt into this service, right? So I want to view this content. So they'll tell publishers that I want to opt in. The publishers have to have a way to flow that opt-in or that desire to view content all across the ecosystem. So we have to develop mechanisms for publishers to tell us that this user wants to receive content. Then we have to tell all the buyers that they want to receive this content. Then we have to tell the viewability vendors and the measurement vendors and all the different players in the ecosystem. So this requires standardized ways for us to talk to each other.
Do you think that this could be a one-stop shop then for someone to manage their identity? Like, so, like, you know, in GDPR you have to give the right to a person to see how their data is being used or delete them from the system, right? And so this could be a system for them, for that layer to protect users.
Yeah, I think it's a system for users to express their desires to the industry, and I think that it's a user control mechanism. So users can say, here's what I want, and here's what I don't want. And I shouldn't have to have that conversation every website I visit or every app I open. I should be able to tell the world, this is what I want to see, and this is what I want you to do. And then it's on us as an industry to collaborate collectively to make sure that that data flows collectively. And where this all goes eventually is users set preferences and say, here's my preferences. We, as an industry, then use data instead of tracking to model that user. So instead of dropping something on your page and following you around, I can determine, based on what I know about you, here's the type of content you want to receive, here's what you told me you want to receive, so I'm always delivering the right message at the right time.
So what's Rubicon's role in this then? Like, are you one of the vendors that can be able to ingest this data and model accurately on behalf of publishers, or how do you see your role there?
I mean, the role of the exchange is to bring buyers and sellers together in a positive way. Right, so what we want to do is take all of the data that the publishers have and all the data that the buyers have and allow them to manage that collectively in real time. So publishers know a lot about what users like, what articles they read, what they want to see. Buyers know a lot about users from all of the CRM data they've captured over the years, but nobody wants that data. Everyone is very guarded with their data. They don't want it to be leaked, or they want it to, to fall out of their control. So what you need is an independent marketplace at the center that can manage that data in a secure way. It'll allow publishers to contribute what they know about users in a way that they know is secure, and buyers as well. So the exchange really becomes a super fast, clean pipe for buyers and sellers to exchange information.
And obviously the incentives here are user first, but also improving yield for publishers, and it's about making more money for publishers. And you think that, well, we all know that if we have a universal identifier that can compete with Facebook and Google, money will flow in our direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's about capturing the highest value users and the highest value impressions. You know, today, the way we've done this is we just throw as many ads at a user as we possibly can, and if one of the 10,000 ads I've shown you, you'll like. What I should do is make sure I know as much about you as possible and what you want and what you've told us through opt-in that you want to see, so that I'm only driving you a small number of ads, but they're always relevant, they're always interesting, they're always fun.
All right, Tom, it's all about making money, and if publishers come together and the vendors come together, we'll all make more money for the industry. So cool. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
And that was Trader Talk TV, and we'll see you next time.